if you say run, I'll run with you. And if you say hide, we'll hide. Because my love for you would break my heart in two. If you should fall into my arms and tremble like a flower.
Hello, all, and welcome to yet another Hacking HR conversation, part of our April series. And also, good whatever moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones, whether now live, listening and watching, or going to the recording later on. It's such a joy to welcome you on my screen today. I am here from Basel in Switzerland. My name is Minola Jacques, but over the next hour, you can call me Hacking HR and I will gladly reply. I'm a journalist by trade, a change manager by choice, and an absolute Hacking HR supporter by calling. And today we will be having a very, very short, but hopefully super value dense conversation on developing the next generation of business leaders. What makes a great boss a great boss? We have Jessa in the backstage keeping us smooth on all things logistics. Thank you so very much, Jessa, for all your help. And while you will be bringing our speakers onto the stage, I will just remind everyone that in case you want to go back and watch some recordings from our March series, please do visit us at hackinghrlab.io or just follow us on LinkedIn. It's always a pleasure to have you. Also, I do encourage you to use the comments. Just say hello, drop us a note so we know where we are touching you today. And also, please feel free to use the comments as your own platform of conversation. This is your space just as much as it is our panelists. Ask questions, participate in the conversation, and who knows where that will take you to. So thank you so very much. I already see Jessica, Tracy, and Anuj on my screen. All of you veterans already of Hacking HR, always a joy to see you popping up. And by now, you know the drill. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen, and I will ask you to kindly introduce yourselves. And also, let's start with a small additional question. I would invite you to think of the best boss you've ever had and in a few words describe what made them stand out. So Jessica, you will go first, but otherwise no pressure.
No pressure. So hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Siegel. I am based in Atlanta. I am currently consulting and also looking for my next full-time gig. My background is in learning and development. I actually opened the second Panera Bread in the country when I was 16 years old and ended up doing all the hiring and onboarding and training and wrote the first training manuals for all the employees for corporate Panera at 16 years old. And that's how I stumbled into the world of talent development, and I have since stayed there. My more recent work is focusing on really learning and development, everything from early career to manager upskilling. And if I put on my hat now and think about the best bosses that I've had in my career and what were those skills or things that really made them the best boss, it's really people who were transparent, people who I knew were very supportive of me and my career and genuinely so. And ultimately, people who understood how I was wired and what I needed and how to help me clear or overcome roadblocks or offer support when I needed it, and just really could kind of pick up on maybe even if I wasn't articulating, they knew what was going on in my head and were able to help me, move forward into those next places.
Thank you so very much, Jessica. And I just want to tell our audience that this question is open for them just as much as it is open for you, because at the end of the day, it's about a human relationships, and that comes with a lot of cultural subtitles, personal preferences. So we're also very, very curious to see what are great bosses across nationalities and, generations and whatever intersectionality we have in our audience today. Tracy, welcome.
Hi, Manola. Hi, Jessica and Anuj. It's nice to see both of you here. I'm the Chief People Officer for a company called the Granite Group, and we're a wholesale distributor in the Northeast. And so I lead all people functions across 6 states and about 800 people. And I do a few other fun things on the side, including getting to do things like this every once in a while, which really feeds my soul. I've been really fortunate, very fortunate. And I think in talking to my friends, this is extremely unusual. I've had a lot of really terrific bosses, including my current one, who I talk about a lot. But when I think about my truly great bosses who've really helped challenge and change me, it was my first one and my first job. I worked for UPS, which is a large global company. Benita Joseph, I was very, very linear in my thinking, and that's the way we did things in HR, maybe in the early 90s, but not so much now. And she really pushed me very far out of my comfort zone and helped change the trajectory of my career and helped change my mindset. And then my last CEO at my last company, Andy Greenwald, really taught me strategy and also saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. So pulled them out of me. And so I'm really grateful for everyone I've worked for along the way, just a few minor exceptions, but generally, even the tough bosses teach you something.
Thank you so very much, Tracy. Anuj, welcome. So good to have you with us.
Thank you, Manola. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from whichever part of the world you're joining in. My name is Anuj Kathuria. After having spent 22 years in the corporate world at C-level across multiple industries, I decided to hang my boots and join my first love, consulting. And I started my own consulting firm about 7 months back, which is focusing on people development, HR transformation, and HR digitalization. The question you asked, Manola, pretty tough one to answer. I think across 2 decades plus, there have been number of bosses. But I think some quality, it's very difficult to pinpoint one of them because each one of them brings something very different on the table. So it would be unfair to say one is the best and the other is not, because I think it's very contextual to the environment that you're operating in. A sum total which I've taken up, which actually made me what I am today. Some of the key skills that my former bosses exhibited. Number one is being authentic. I think to me, that's one of the most important elements. Be authentic and not robotic or not just posturing for the sake of it. Number two, they have always been invested in my growth, focusing on my strengths and ensuring that I get upskilled and reskilled, not only just in one context, but multiple different contexts, so that I develop a much holistic understanding and mastery of that respective skill, which they wanted me to exhibit or display at that point of time. Last but not the least, my all good bosses had one thing in common. They always focused on improving my quality of thinking by challenging me, not by giving the answers, by making me walk the tough path, letting me make mistakes and holding me accountable for those mistakes, but telling me that, okay, these were lessons learned. They're not failures, they're lessons learned. And it was important for you to learn those lessons. I think to me, those are some of the most important things that have stood out for me, at least.
Thank you all so very much. I am so happy to see that you all have been very lucky in the Great Boss department. So I'm looking forward to see where this conversation will lead us. Now, I am sure we all have come across this saying that, especially for someone's first job, first experience in the workplace, the manager is more important than the role itself. So I would really invite you to give us a few insights into how has this first, direct reporting line experience shaped you as future leaders. And I will pronounce the unmuting competition officially open. So please build your own conversation.
Oh, you may be
Tracy.
surprised, Manila. I'll jump in. I'll jump in on this one. So, I have said now I'm not planning on changing jobs, but I've said for a really long time, my number one thing in a role that I look for is who I work for. Yeah, as a CPO, I'd always work for the CEO, and that would be that's it for me. That's a hard line for me. But if I don't work for someone that I like, trust, respect, and that's a visionary leader that can provide clarity and really leads people first, then I can't do my job. And I think I've often advised friends and others that look for a boss, not the title, not that, because a good boss will help develop you whichever way you want to go, whether that's up, sideways, down, left, right, whatever, because development isn't always up and it's not always in, it's sometimes out. So a good boss will develop you wherever you need to go and really act as your partner.
I'll add to what Tracy said. For someone, I think the context is very different, Manola. For someone who is joining, for someone for whom it's the first job, I think a lot of expectation mismatch occurs because when you're fresh out of college and you join the corporate world, uh, suddenly you find yourself in a very big sea, which you never have encountered. And at that point of time, I think you need somebody to hold your hand and help you navigate that. Somebody who's there to help you understand the nuances. What is, what should be, and what should not be. And someone who invests time in understanding what your respective strengths are, where do you need to really build, and provide you that kind of an environment where you can grow and not just treat you like a pack of wolves. I think what I have also observed is the one shoe fit all approach never works. It is something that has to be hyper personalized and hyper contextualized to every single person's specific needs. What might work for me might not work for Jessica. What might work for Jessica might not work for Tracy, and vice versa. And there are differences when it's your first job versus your second, third, or the follow on jobs, right? After a period of time, you do get an understanding of, okay, what is my own level of comfort, what kind of people, what are my strengths I can display, how can I contribute to the organization, and what am I also looking in a boss, because after the first experience you have at least some understanding of how organizations work. You talk to your friends, you see what's happening in your organization. And Tracy very rightly said, you don't have the luxury to choose your own boss perhaps in the first boss, but thereafter uh, I think you do have that opportunity where it is a symbiotic relationship, right? Where they also get to learn a lot of things from you, and you also get to learn a lot of things from you. Where you shake hands and walk on a path together, more of a hyper coordinated path than being somebody leading from the front and asking you to follow. I think good bosses ask you to walk along with them, not behind them.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you so much. Jessica.
Yeah, I fully agree with a lot of what Tracy and Anuj were saying, especially as far as, choosing your boss. And we know that people work for leaders, and people more often in the workplace leave leaders than they do companies or roles. But as far as how managers, or what you could be looking for in your first manager, I think it's somebody who can really help you develop those fundamental skills that are going to carry with you throughout your entire career. Because there are some really basic fundamental things, whether it's time management or managing up, and everybody's going to have their own lists that they're aware of these are the things that I need to be working on. But then there's also hopefully things that your manager can help you identify, of whether it's giving feedback or how you receive feedback, just some of those really basic fundamental things that if you don't develop in your early to mid 20s, they're going to be thorns in your side the longer you continue in your career, and they're not going to go away. So I think having a manager that can be receptive, because hopefully, folks come in and they say, oh, I really want to skill up in these areas or these fundamental soft skills. And then maybe the manager can add one or two as they're working, if like you really need to improve on time management, or you really need to improve on, giving feedback or whatever it is, that can really help to just develop those skills that will really hopefully help you for success as you progress in your career.
Something that you all touched upon in one way or another made me curious about how can someone, as a candidate going through recruitment conversations, spot a great boss? Anything that you can share from a candidate perspective, saying, oh, okay.
Very good question, Minola. Actually, an interview to me, it's an opportunity for two parties to look at each other and see if there can be a synergy in a working relationship. It is as much important for the candidate to evaluate the organization and the boss like it is for the hiring manager to evaluate the candidate. There is nothing that stops you from asking the right questions, right? If you are with a hiring manager, and there is no harm asking him or her about what have been some of the biggest pitfalls that they have seen in their career and how have they come up from them, or what do they really look for in an ideal employee or for that respective role, an ideal candidate. I'm sure the hiring manager, whether it's a male or a female, would not resist answering those questions because they are even they are interested in getting the right fit for the right role. And the more synergy you have at that point of time, the better it is for both the parties. And likewise, there are multiple questions you can ask. It is a candidate's job as well and full responsibility to even figure out whether I would gel with that person or not, whether his working style or the kind of personality I'm going to be working with is going to be detrimental to my career, my personal growth, my professional growth, or it's going to be helpful for that. And apart from interview as well, nobody stops you from connecting with the employees in that team and seeking feedback. It's an open world today, right? And interview just happens to be one of those arenas. I think beyond that as well, like organizations check our social profiles, they look at what we are doing, our digital footprint. There is a background check that happens in every candidate. And I think the candidate also has the right to do a background check on the hiring manager. What stops us from doing that? And you can get to
Thank
know
you,
whether I'm a fit or not. It's nothing about being right or wrong. It's about whether I fit that team or not, depending on my own context and depending on where on the maturity level, the context of business, the context of industry, or the context of that team as well. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I don't know if it's just me, but on a few occasions your audio broke and there was a small loop. Let's hope that it will get better. Tracy, I see you unmuted. Please.
Yeah, and I like what Anuj was saying, and particularly about the social media. There's so many tools out there, and so many tools. And I'll just tell a super quick story. There was a woman years ago who I did not know, but who we were connected on social media and was looking for a job at my former company, and all positive experiences. So I'm happy to share that, and was wondering what I knew about so and so because I was connected, and was kind of brave enough to just really reach out cold and ask those questions. And there are things like certainly Glassdoor and Blind and other social tools where you can take all of that with a grain of salt. You can look at Facebook, you can look at LinkedIn. I think one of the things you can do on LinkedIn, if you drill down enough, is you can look at managers, if this is the boss you're going to report to, and then you can look at maybe who was connected to them or people in the department and check turnover. I mean, it takes a little bit of manipulation of data, but you can kind of dive in to see what that looks like. And if you're seeing a lot of people maybe leaving that particular department, that might be a red flag. And then the other thing I like to tell people is, see how people talk about their team. Do they talk about their people by name, or do they say my staff, my direct reports, my subordinates? Do they say Tom, Pat, Jane, whomever? Do they talk about them? Do they get to know them as humans? So not everybody has the luxury of being able to choose where they work or who they work for. So many people are out of work. But if you're in a situation where you are able to make a choice, I think those are some good questions to ask.
Yeah, I agree with everything Anuj and Tracy said. The one thing I will add is the past few roles that I've had, I actually intentionally networked my way in with friends of like, oh, I see, I have 20 connections with a sales leader who works there. So even if it's not somebody in the same department, sometimes that's better because you can just reach out and say, hey, I'm a finalist for this role. What do you know about the people and culture team? What do you know about the leader that I'd be working for? What's your experience with the company and the culture overall? And I've never been hesitant to do that because at the end of the day, the company's doing reference checks on me, most likely before I'm extended an offer. So I feel like it's okay for me to do reference checks on the company as well. But don't be afraid to use your network. Hopefully use your network to get in the door there. So don't be afraid to use your network to identify an appropriate person or two to talk with within the organization before you go ahead and accept that offer and make that formal move in your career.
Well, regardless of the topic, one thing that we hear over and over and over again is that today's work reality and tomorrow's work reality is fundamentally different from what we lived pre-COVID. So my next question is, in what way, if any, a great boss today and tomorrow is different from a great boss of 3 years ago, 5 years ago? And how do you see this trend of redefining great bosses going?
Yeah, I can chime in on this one first because this came up a lot in a recent role. I think the biggest thing with changing the mindset on managers is we have managers right now in their 50s and 60s who have been managers for 20 years, but they've never managed a remote team or a hybrid team. And that's a very different reality than managing a team in person. So at my most recent company, one of the sales leaders said, I'm very used to coming into an office every day and subscribe to the management style of management by walking around. And he said, that doesn't really work when I'm in my living room by myself. And he's like, I'm 55 and I literally don't know how to manage my sales team. And I've been a sales leader for over 20 years. So I think there's a real focus right now on managers and team leaders and VP and C-suite needing to recalibrate of how are we communicating? How are we managing our team? How are we looking out for those things that you would notice or observe in the office when we're not all in the office together all the time? And really changing how you've been doing your job as a manager for 20 years. And I think in the overall learning and development, as far as upskilling, that's really the piece of identifying what the managers at your company need to stay relevant and stay effective managing teams in this ongoing remote and hybrid world of work.
Tracy.
I think also, and I that's a great point by Jessica. This is certainly a new world of work, and that's certainly something that 3 to 5 years ago, the companies that were doing that were probably training their people, and it wasn't just a today we're here, tomorrow we're gone type of situation that lots of us dealt with. I think the other really important thing to acknowledge is that we are really in a mental health crisis, and we're involved in people's lives in ways that we weren't a few years ago. And I think that's only going to get more intense as we move toward the future. And so we're having to connect people to resources. We're having to make sure managers are trained to observe certain behaviors, even if it's across the screen, or to pay attention to how their people are working in ways that they haven't before. And I think that's something that as we're developing the new generation of leaders, we're seeing so much empathy, at least in our people, and we're seeing so much desire to meet people where they're at and really create a sense of belonging, which I think is wonderful. But that's a change, and I think creating that adaptability, that ability to develop a growth mindset and change how you maybe have managed before is really, really important for all of our managers.
Adding to what the great points that Jessica and Tracy already said. I think not only COVID, if you look at the last one decade, businesses across the world have been impinged by this technology infusion and disruption. And we are living in times where novelties of morning become obsolete by the evening. So, like Tracy said, the very fundamental of learning agility, authenticity, and though people have been able to adopt technology, walk along with that, leverage that, I think what we need is people, and this will continue to grow. The the advent of technology in human resource processes, the way we manage organizations, the way we manage workforces, it'll continue to evolve, and that is the fundamental nature of the evolution of work. But having said that, people who still have a very high level of emotional intelligence, who are able to keep that human touch alive, and like Jessica said, uh, it's the concept of hybrid work, remote work existed only in bits and pieces decade ago. Today it's the norm. Tomorrow there would be something else. So do people have the emotional stability and viability to understand, manage that? The needs for people who are within the office premises versus the ones who are working from remote corners, it's a borderless workforce. You need a very different set of manager, you need a very different set of skill sets in a boss to manage, groom, and prepare that set of leaders. And fortunately, unfortunately, if you even look at the labor statistics for the last 10 decades, uh, I think the last 3 4 years have been the one where there is the maximum gap between the five working generations. The youngest generation is taking over. The baby boomers are moving out. Gen X is there. Gen Z is there. The needs of everyone are very very different. Now we need people who can understand these in a much more qualitative way and as a human being and still give their authentic best in those circumstances.
We are now a few minutes away from the middle of our conversation. I don't know where time went. So I will just take a few seconds to welcome those who joined us a little bit later. And please don't worry, you did miss out on a great conversation so far, but you can go to hackinghrlab.io and watch the recording. Now, you can call this, nurture or nature, content and context question. But listening to you, I got curious about how do we bring organizational culture in the conversation about great bosses? What role does it play, if any? And how do great bosses influence organizational culture and the other way around?
That's a $1 billion question, Minola. See, in my limited understanding, there are many theories about culture. There are many white papers and many experts opining about that. To me, it's as simple as the reflection of your leadership behaviors in the organization, which comes true by virtue of your ways of working in the organization. If the leaders itself don't get involved in defining the ways of working, recognizing those, rewarding those, living by those, a code, it's an unsaid code that you need to live by. Then, no matter how much you talk about culture, it only remains on paper and you only keep doing some peripheral work around that. But as leaders, it is their responsibility to involve everybody in the formation of the organizational culture. What are going to be the ways of working? How do those ways of working impact your business operating model, your HR operating model? How do the people process technology revolve around those? And given the diversity of workforce that we have, it is not about three or four people sitting in an ivory tower and defining, okay, this needs to be our culture. It's not something that can happen in 2 3 days time. It is a long term intervention which requires in depth understanding, first defining what do you really mean by culture, what do you really want to create in this organization. Unless you have those ways of working, you can never come out with what are going to be the right behaviors for your organization, which are going to define how things happen. More often than not, people are more concerned about what we have to achieve. But for the culture piece to be successful, it has to be how do you achieve what do you achieve? And that has to be lived by the leaders, defined by the leaders, by co-creating that with the employees, not just defining and saying, okay, this is what we want. Sorry, it doesn't work that way.
Thank you, Anuj. Tracy.
So thanks, Manila. Thanks, Anuj. We put manager learning, and we embedded that within our strategic plan, not our people team strategic plan, though it's there, our company strategic plan. So we could put the resources, the time, the investment behind giving managers what they need. So we're a company that has almost 60 physical locations. So we've tended to, like a lot of companies like in our field and similar things, you're the next person who hasn't been a manager yet. Here you go. Good luck. And we haven't tended to invest in that. Now, we changed that a number of years ago, and we're continuing to iterate on that and continuing to do that. But by really, really living that that experience and working on that, like Anuj talked about, co-creating that experience of manager learning with our managers, with our future managers. We have an emerging leaders program. That's really helping our organization, take the next steps into the future, because we can't open new locations if we don't have future leaders. We can't thrive as a business if we have leaders who are running people out the door. So there's really, in my mind, nothing more important than developing your managers and equipping them with those tools, because they're who your people are going to go to if they're having issues. They're going to notice if your people are having issues. That frontline manager is so incredibly critical to our companies, and they've been under-resourced for far too long.
Yeah, I was thinking as Tracy and Anuj were talking about the question of culture and how managers can kind of affect culture. The company culture, in a good company culture, it's coming top down, but it's also coming from bottom up. It's coming from both directions, because everybody needs to walk the walk and talk the talk and own it to some level. But then, especially in larger organizations, we have subcultures in the individual business units, and it could even be by, the manager team of the folks that work on this team. This is a subculture for this team and our working norms, versus another team in that same business unit might have a totally different style or working norms and culture, and that's totally fine. So I think that's really where managers can affect change of the culture that they want to lead on their team. And hopefully it's aligned with the overall business strategy, because I've seen way too many managers that I've worked with, for coaching and training, who are working in an org that the organizational culture or the direction that it's going really didn't align with how they wanted to manage and how they wanted to be showing up for their teams. And when those two things are in competition, that's a really hard place for the managers to be overall. So where managers can really affect change and spend their time on culture is at the team level, and discovering of what are the norms and figuring out as a team of, what makes sense, how and when do we want to work, communicate, interact, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see that there's one trend that comes up by the half of Hacking HR conversations, people trying to stay away from going last, because it's always difficult to be in the last the last one in any round of answers. You mentioned training and development. You mentioned various programs. So if we can take a few minutes and really look at how can great bosses be developed, ideally in the flow of work. Tracy, I see you go first.
Well, I was going to say that, then I was like, I'll let Jessica go first. I think, you can hire a consultant, and that's wonderful. You can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to have consultants come in and develop programs. And if you have the resources to do that, that's great. But you don't have to follow a specific formula, though there should be some type of process. And I'll tell you what's worked for our organization. And yes, in the flow of work, I think it's a lot of modeling. So model the what you want to see, and that's and I'll give my example because I was not a good leader and I'm still working on it every day. I was actually pretty bad for a long period of time. And I really try to be very open, and Anuj kept mentioning authenticity, authentic, to really to coach, not manage my team, to help them get to the answers instead of give them the answers, and to really be there as a resource and help them to help themselves. So it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's part of it. And I think over time, these little things that we do and this behavior that we model can really help people see if they want to take a step into a manager role, and then again take that step. And having mentors or sponsors, we have an emerging leaders program where everyone has an executive sponsor, and so they have somebody within the organization championing them to take the next steps in their career should they want to do that. And I think that mentorships are great, but I think sponsorships are sometimes even better, or those partnerships like that. And then, programs that work for your company, and constantly get feedback, constantly get feedback. And again, going back to what Anu said, co-create, work with your people, not for your people.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tracy said. The one thing that I will add is the mentorship and the on the job learning and growth opportunities. We know those are the two areas that people really have behavior change and grow. We also know that those cohort based and new manager upskilling, those are effective, but those are short lived, 6 to 8 months, and then you kind of move on. The other piece is not everybody who becomes a new manager has the same needs. Maybe they just haven't managed a team this large or haven't worked in this industry. So also understanding and helping those new leaders to identify where are the areas that you need to grow, where are the areas that you need to upskill, and making sure that the organization has some kind of policy or resource for that person to either spend 10% of your job, shadowing this other leader and working on this project and seeing how they lead a team on this project on, this software implementation or whatever it is. Or even just resources of you need a coach or you need to go to a class and learn this skill or this software, whatever it is. But making sure that the organization has flexibility to meet people where they are and address those individual needs, because that's where it's going to be really different person to person. And that's also where it can really kind of make or break your management style and your management career.
I have a little different take on that, in addition to what you both said, which is that given my experience, I have been able to drive these changes by a much more scientific method, in addition to what's been said. Uh, I think the most important point which was said was how do we reduce threats which are associated with these changes? And how do we remove people's barriers? Because people come with their own set of beliefs, their own set of values. And if that does not gel with the organization, there always will be conflict. And if you look at any organization, go to 10 different teams, there would be certain parts of your culture which are predominant and certain parts which are very dominant over there. But there is still there are still couple of things which bind the entire organization together into one piece called the culture. For to me, it's about a broad spectrum of how do you activate your leaders, right? Is there focused time and attention on behaviors that is being given by the leadership of the organization? Do your leaders publicly recognize those who live the respective ways of working or behaviors? Do leaders share their success stories, their learning lessons when they have come up in the organization? What challenges have they faced? And one of the best ways I've seen that how do you use behavioral missions that don't shove but nudge people to use micro actions to build habits. See, for me, it's about shifting how do we plan and do work today to how we'll do in the future. And for that, how do we align these with the performance matrix of the organization? Yeah, we can have cultural nuances, we can have behaviors, we can have capability building interventions, but as they say, what is not measured is not delivered. So from that standpoint, are the ones who are holding the torch accountable for it? Do leaders get evaluated on their behaviors by their peers or by their juniors? Have we embedded that into their leadership scorecards, whether it is hiring assessments or talent assessments or things? I think if you look at those areas, uh, they have worked for me more. And yes, looking at removing the very element of a threat and providing a psychological safety net around it. But fine, there will be mistakes. You suddenly can't expect a person from jump from point A to point B. There will be mistakes. But is there somebody to handhold them? Is there somebody to help them walk till the time that behavior becomes a habit?
I would I would like to challenge you to look at this topic from a slightly different angle. What do great bosses need from their teams in order to be great bosses? Because it seems that we oftentimes speak from the other direction, from the team and the direct reports. But what do great bosses need from their teams in order to be great bosses?
I can chime in on this one. I feel like the answer is the overall of everything I'm thinking about. It's transparency. It's especially the larger your team is, you're going to miss things. You're not going to be in that meeting and hear what happened directly. So it needs to be a level of transparency. If here's what's going on, this issue popped up and you weren't in this and you didn't know how to deal with it. So I think a level of authenticity, like Tracy was saying, from your direct reports of being real and being transparent and sharing everything that's really going on in a way that they may not be able to see. But then also being, whether it's a formal 360 review or just, your normal one-on-one, whatever your cadence might be, it's really being transparent about, this is how it works for me to communicate. Or when you did this, it really didn't sit well with me and a few others on the team. So also providing that feedback to them, because if there's behaviors or ways or things that they're doing that aren't resonating with the group, generally speaking, as humans, we equate silence with compliance. But sometimes silence is not always a good thing. So really just being able to have that open relationship and really just kind of help to keep a pulse on what's going on with the team, but also what's going on with them and may or may not be working for you or for others on the team.
Thank you.
I think that's an awesome point, Jessica. And, I was thinking about this we tend to think of leaders creating trust and psychological safety and fostering an environment where trust and psychological safety, exist. Trust is the cornerstone of every single relationship, but we don't talk often enough about the trust that leaders have to create that, right? And leaders have to be trustworthy, but you also have to trust your team, and you have to trust that a team is creating psychological safety within itself and for its leader. And I've been in situations where that didn't happen, and it makes it extremely, extremely difficult because you can manage through performance as a leader, you can manage through somebody having any kind of issues, right? But if somebody is destroying trust, or if somebody is proves themselves not worthy of trust or does something to break that, that is really, really difficult.
I think the expectations have to be same from both ends. If we expect leaders to be authentic, transparent, giving their best, they also expect their teams to be honest, authentic, transparent, and given their best to whatever they are. I think most of the battle is won if both the parties are transparent and authentic, and both display certain level of emotional intelligence. As long as the other side is also looking at investing their time, their effort, I think nothing is unachievable from that standpoint.
Mm.
And it's okay to be vulnerable. No one is you know Superman over here. We all will make mistakes, we all will fall. Leaders also expect their teams to be flexible, adaptable, open to the work, open to different challenging situations. There will be times in the span of the business, in a span of a fiscal year or calendar year where things will go awry, and they will. Does the team support the leader? The leader will also make certain wrong decisions. Is there acceptance of that? I think that level of camaraderie, if there is in the team, things
Mm.
work pretty well.
Thank you all. Now, I do remember that you all made a blanket disclaimer that you only had great bosses. But at the same time, Tracy, something that you said went on a mental post-it note, and I know you won't be surprised by that by now, on how even when you have a less than great boss, you still have so much to learn from that experience. So I would like to come back and collect on that post-it note. And what have you learned from a relationship with a less than great boss?
I've had mostly great bosses, not all great bosses. And I think my biggest learnings came from those not so great bosses. And I think I won't tell you where, but I had one experience in my career that was, let's just say, not as good as the rest. And that experience, which was short, probably taught me more than any other experience because I had to learn to advocate for myself, something I wasn't good at. I had to learn to advocate for others, something I really hadn't done much before. Surprisingly, I had to learn to navigate really complex relationships, and I had to learn what to do when the way I thought it was supposed to go, the way it had gone in my career, just didn't happen. So I think if we're even the worst of situations can teach us something, and if we're paying attention, they can teach us something really valuable. And if we're really paying attention, we can take what they teach us and turn that into something better in your next move.
Yeah, I was thinking of a similar angle to what Tracy was talking about. I think I've learned more from the not great bosses I've had in some ways than the really great bosses I've had. The not great bosses, I agree with Tracy. It really pushed me in a way, and I feel like I grew more personally and professionally during that time because it was so difficult. The manager I'm thinking of, he just tore everything apart. Like everything I did, he just tore it apart, but he did that to everyone. So it really had me flip how I was working, and I was extra on top of things and very, very thorough and very more meticulous than I've ever been, because anything that he wanted to tear apart, I had to have 5 examples or reasons why that was the right direction to go or the right thing to do. So it really just made me be more meticulous and thorough as a professional than I'd ever been in my career. And I've definitely carried some of that with me. The other thing that I think I've picked up from the good bosses and the not good bosses is every experience I've had professionally, you're making, as Manola would say, our little post-it notes. We're filing away of, this really worked great, or, this was really a miss, and don't do this when you're managing people, or do more of the open conversation and getting to know them and less of the judging or accusation making or whatever our positive and negative experiences have been. So I think with the especially negative bosses, we have such an opportunity, a manual, a real life handbook happening in real time. This isn't working for me. And when I'm managing folks, I want to make sure that I am never going to be doing those things. And I'm going to do more of these other things that I really know, work for me or work for my team.
Anuj,
I
you're
think
always in the difficult spot somehow.
I think you're sitting on a gold mine if you have a not so good boss. Under good bosses, you learn 10 different ways how to do things. With a not so good boss, you learn 100 things how not to do and what not to do. For me, it's been in that space that I have learned 100 ways of not doing a specific thing. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. When you have certain bosses who are not so good ones and not able to exhibit the right traits, you are put into multiple challenging situations, and there is no one to help you navigate yourself. I think that experience is priceless of how do you navigate that situation. For me, it's about how I have been able to build up my patience, how I have been able to build up my own emotional intelligence, and see and agree on the fact. And somewhere, I would say, over a couple of years, not only acknowledge, accept wholeheartedly that yes, there will be failures. And each one of those failures is a lessons that takes you one step closer to success. So there are a lot of learnings that you get from not so good bosses as well. When you see how they impact the business, how they treat people, their follies are in front of you. I think it's up to us. How do we want to take that? Do you want to grapple that and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to do exactly like this thing because it might work for that person or it might not work. It's again contextual. But as an individual, I think we all have our own list of what we want to pick up and what we don't want to pick up from there and how it helps us grow in the longer run.
Hmm. Jessica, Tracy, you want to add something or no? Okay. Um, we've been talking a lot about learning, but I do believe that it's about learning, unlearning, and relearning. So here's a challenge. What was your biggest aha moment of unlearning and relearning of what a great boss really is? One moment when you were like, oh, I've always associated this with being a great boss. I might not have been in the rightest of spots. Or the other way around, I never associated this with a great boss, but here's a great addition. And I will give you a few seconds to think about because we are approaching the end of our conversation. And again, just welcoming those who joined us late, asking you to just come and visit us on hackinghrlab.io or our LinkedIn page. We have so many more conversations lined up for April, May, and even June is in the works. And you can also see all the recordings from March. And now, coming back to you, your unlearning and relearning moments about great bosses.
I'll go first. Uh, I think 15 years back, I had this revelation and learning that great bosses do not give you the answers to problems. They make you go through the problems. I was always under the impression, okay, a good boss is somebody who will help me give a solution to a problem. But I think that myth and that fallacy of mine was broken, and thankfully broken so that its great bosses are the ones who help challenge you for your own quality of thinking and help you get to the answers yourself than by giving you the answers and making you walk that path so that you remember it. For me, it was that moment.
Thank you, Anuj.
I had a really I can't, I've had a very long week, so I'm having a hard time. Really pivotal. Okay, let me just start over. I wish we could edit these, but I know they're live, right? So I had a really pivotal
moment. Pivotal moment.
Thank you.
I can
Not
say it
like
wrong.
me.
I can say it wrong because I'm a non-native speaker. So you had a pivotal moment.
Pivotal. Thank you, Manila. We'll connect offline as to my long week. So pivotal moment in my career where I told you I wasn't a really great boss, and I really wasn't. Um, so I had a woman who worked on my team, and she was wonderful. And I noticed she was kind of quiet, and for a period of time, and I thought maybe it was something personal. And because I often adopt the style of whoever I work with, I just kind of would come in and say hi and talk to her when I needed to. And this was over a decade ago. And then one day she says to me, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, come on in." And she said, "I have a problem." And I'm like, "Oh no." She's like, "It's you." I went, "What?" And I think about this often, and I've talked about this often, how much courage it took her to come to her boss and say, "You're a problem." And why I was a problem, because I wasn't, and she was 100% right, I wasn't giving her what she needed. I learned I wasn't, you know, praising her when she did good work. I wasn't really giving her any feedback whatsoever. And I really came out of I felt awful. I still think about it a lot. I still remember that day. And what I came out of that with was everybody's different. Everybody needs something else, right? It's something different. And just because I may not need X, Y, or Z does not mean that this person on my team doesn't need that Hannah doesn't mean that Laura doesn't need this. And so I really learned to, first of all, pay attention. I'm not naturally empathetic. That was a muscle I had to work on developing. Pay attention, and then really manage people or lead people as individuals, not as treating everybody the same on a team.
Yeah, I was thinking about the treating people as individuals, as opposed to blanket style of management. And I think that's very relevant today. What I'll say is the first organization I was really leading a team, I was there for a long time. And it was a fast-paced, work a lot of hours, burn and churn culture. So the way that I had to manage in that organization, like I took a Myers-Briggs profile and I was looking at it, it was like, this doesn't sound like me, but this is who I need to be to function and not drown in this organization. And then when I had the opportunity to manage at a different company with a different culture that I felt was more aligned to my natural, and I retook my Myers-Briggs and I read it, I was like, yep, that's actually me. So really kind of having that aha moment as I'm navigating through my career of sometimes in different cultures, you have to flex and you might not be operating in a way that you're totally comfortable, but if that's operating in a way that you're going to survive in the culture, your team's going to thrive in the culture, then maybe that's okay. I mean, I was constantly exhausted because I was operating and behaving in a way that was not my natural. So when I left that job, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to not be mentally and emotionally exhausted at the, on Friday afternoon every week. But I think that was really a big aha moment for me of, how you manage could be really different organization to organization, or even team to team if you make moves within an organization. And how are you adapting to hopefully get the most out of your role, get the most out of the team that you're working with, and really help to facilitate the business growth through your lens and your role.
Well, it is so sad to say that we came to the end of our conversation. But before we do say goodbye, I do have one last challenge for you. Recently, I was reminded of Bob Anderson's The Leader Brings the Weather in Scaling Leadership. So my last challenge for you today is, what kind of weather phenomenon would you say a great boss is, and why? Very short. I will give you a few seconds to think about, while I will thank everybody for spending this last hour with us, whether now live or during the recording. A special thank you to Jessa backstage for taking us through logistics so smoothly, like every single time. Thank you, Jessa. A big, big thank you for putting up with my voice. I'm fighting COVID #2 over here. So back to weather phenomenon. What weather phenomenon would a great boss be for you? And what we will do counterclockwise, which means Anuj, you go first, Tracy, and then Jessica.
I think for me, it's a combination of all four weathers: summer, winter, spring, autumn. Depending on the situation I am in and the kind of person I am in, I would need a differential treatment every different point of time. You cannot eat pasta 365 days a year. We are humans. Change is the spice of life. And we also, and if we, on a serious note, if we have to grow, we need to be dealt with and given those experiences. So for
Thank
me,
you.
the weather has to be a combination of all four, depending on what weather I want to have and which is good for me.
Okay, so while hearing the Four Seasons from Vivaldi in the background, Tracy.
I'm just going to say this is a good one, Manola. I'm just going to say I live in New England in the United States. I'm just going to say New England weather. A good leader is New England weather because we have a saying here that goes, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute. So we have to be extremely adaptable to different changes in conditions, just like leaders have to be adaptable to different changes in the organization and people.
Thank you.
I was thinking a rainstorm, and hopefully the beautiful sun comes out at the end of the rainstorm. Because sometimes, especially at the beginning of a relationship, you have to, go through hard things, and it might be uncomfortable or messy. To hopefully get to the sun at the end or the rainbow at the end of the rainstorm, that you're in a good place. So I think managers have to be okay with the uncomfortable and the messy to get to the place of ultimate good.
Thank you. This sounds like a very Dutch message. There's no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate clothing. So thank you all so very much. As we go into a weekend, it is quite a special weekend. It is one of the 3 times in 1 century that we have Easter, Ramadan, and the Passover overlapping. So for all of you celebrating whatever it is that you celebrate, happy celebrations, happy festivities. And to all of you, regardless of what you're celebrating, enjoy lovely days with awesome people, great bosses, and many, many reasons to smile. Thank you all so very much, and looking forward to welcoming you soon again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Manola. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Manola. Thank you,
Bye.
Jessica and Noosh.
Bye.
Bye.